The wind howled like a wounded beast across the barren plains, carrying dust, debris, and despair with it. For Clara Whitmore, a struggling widow with 2 hungry children and a half-fallen barn, the storm felt like one more test sent by a merciless world. Her husband had been gone for over a year now, buried under the same soil that refused to grow her crops. She lived alone at the edge of Cedar Hollow, surviving off bread crusts, borrowed grain, and the stubborn hope that tomorrow would be kinder. But as the sky darkened that afternoon, turning the sun into a copper blur, she knew the day was far from kind. The wind began to roar louder, bending the trees and ripping shingles from rooftops. The chickens screamed in their coop and the air grew thick, humming like the sound before judgment. Clara rushed outside, trying to fasten what she could before the tornado touched down. Her hair whipped across her face, her dress clinging to her legs, but she refused to run. Not yet. Not while her home still stood. And then, over the growl of thunder, she heard it, a cry, a man's voice calling out through the wind, faint but desperate. Clara froze. For a moment, she thought it was her mind playing tricks. But then it came again, closer this time. "Help! Someone!" Without thinking, she ran toward the voice, her heart pounding harder than the rain against her chest. The storm was fully alive now, and the sky had turned an eerie shade of green. Trees snapped like twigs, the air filled with grit and smoke. And there, half buried under a fallen tree, lay a man in a torn black coat, his hat gone, blood streaking his forehead. His horse was nowhere in sight. Clara dropped to her knees beside him, gasping for breath as she tried to lift the heavy branch. "Hold on!" she shouted over the thunder. "Don't move!" The man's voice was hoarse. "You should get to shelter, Mom. The storm." But she shook her head. "Not without you." Using every ounce of her strength, Clara dug her hands into the mud and rolled the branch enough for him to crawl free. The tornado was coming closer now, its funnel visible on the horizon, a monstrous swirl tearing across the field. Clara hooked her arm under his and dragged him toward her farmhouse, every step a battle against the storm's pull. They stumbled inside just as the wind ripped the barn roof away. Inside, the air was dark and trembling. Clara slammed the door, threw the latch, and helped the stranger to a chair by the hearth. He was shaking, pale, his chest heaving. "You're bleeding," she said, grabbing a rag. "Let me see." He tried to protest, but she pressed the cloth to his wound anyway, cleaning it as best as she could with trembling hands. "Name's Clara Whitmore," she said between thunderclaps. "You're lucky I heard you." He gave a weak smile. "Lucky indeed." His voice was low and rich, with the faint drawl of a man used to open ranges and command. "I'm Colt Mercer," she frowned, recognizing the name from somewhere. "But—" Before she could ask, the tornado struck. The house shook violently. Glass shattered, and the roof groaned like it might give way. Clara threw herself over him, shielding his head as wind screamed through the cracks. "Stay with me!" she shouted. For endless minutes, the world outside was nothing but chaos. Then, as quickly as it came, the storm moved on. Silence fell, broken only by the distant cries of cattle and the sound of rain on the broken roof. Clara finally lifted her head, heart pounding. "We're alive," she whispered. Colt looked at her, his blue eyes wide with disbelief. "Because of you." When morning came, the world outside looked like another planet. The fields were stripped bare, the barn was gone, and half her fence had vanished. Clara wanted to weep, but she didn't. She just rolled up her sleeves and began to rebuild. To her surprise, Colt stayed. Despite his injuries, he insisted on helping her mend what the storm had taken. "You saved my life," he said. "The least I can do is fix your fence." And over the next few days, they worked side by side, mending, hammering, and quietly talking under the soft, golden light of dawn. There was something calm about him, something that made her heart ease for the first time in months. Still, she never asked who he really was. Not until the day she found the gold signet ring he'd left on the table, engraved with the initials CM and the emblem of Mercer. Ranch, the largest landholding in the county. Clara stared at the ring, her heart thudding. Mercer Ranch was known across 3 states. It owned the railway, the mills, and half the farmland from Cedar Hollow to Ridge Creek. People said Colt Mercer was a man who could buy a town if he wanted to, a man born into wealth but hardened by loss. What was he doing here, hiding under her roof like a wounded drifter? When he came in from chopping wood that evening, she held up the ring. "You weren't honest with me," she said softly. He stopped in the doorway, his face unreadable. "Guess you found out. You're that Colt Mercer. Does it change anything?" She didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to be angry, but another part understood. A man like him didn't need to announce his name. "Why didn't you tell me?" she finally asked. Colt leaned against the doorframe, his shirt still damp from the rain. "Because I wanted you to see me, not my land or money. Just me." His voice carried a weariness that went deeper than exhaustion. "Out there, everyone either fears me or flatters me, but you dragged me out of the dirt without asking who I was. You didn't care." Clara looked away, her eyes glistening. "I cared that you were hurt," she whispered. "That's all." The days that followed were filled with quiet warmth. He helped her rebuild her barn, brought supplies from town, and made her children laugh again. The loneliness that had once haunted her homestead slowly began to lift, replaced by the soft rhythm of shared work and growing affection. The townsfolk soon discovered who her mysterious stranger really was, and whispers began to spread. Some called her lucky, others called her foolish. But Clara didn't care. What mattered was the way Colt looked at her, as if she was the only thing that could calm the storms in his life. One evening, as the sunset painted the sky gold, Colt approached her by the fence they'd rebuilt together. He handed her a deed folded neatly in his hand. "What's this?" she asked. "Land," he said. "Yours, 50 acres, paid for and cleared. You and your kids won't ever have to struggle again." She stared at him, tears welling. "Colt, I can't accept this." He stepped closer. "You can, because it's not charity, it's gratitude. You saved me when no one else would." She shook her head. "You don't owe me anything." He smiled gently. "Then call it something else." The wind picked up again that night, carrying the scent of rain. Clara turned her face toward the horizon, remembering the day the tornado nearly destroyed her and how it brought a stranger to her doorstep. Now that same stranger stood beside her, no longer lost, no longer alone. "You know," Colt said quietly, "storms have a way of showing us what matters. That night I thought I was done for, but then I saw you standing there in the wind, refusing to give up, and I knew I'd found something worth holding on to." She looked at him, her heart full. "And what's that?" He took her hand, rough and warm. "You." As lightning flashed far off in the distance, they stood together. The widow and the cowboy who owned half the county, 2 souls who found each other in the wreckage of a storm.